Okay, hey everybody. Just a little delayed, a little technical difficulties from my guest, but they will be right on in a second. Hmm. I'm just trying to get our guests on. There's a little something going on with the Wi-Fi. Sorry, those should be on pretty soon. Okay, here they are. Fam, hey, can you guys see me on Go Live on Instagram as opposed to me turning this phone? Can somebody give me a heads up? because it'll look much better. Well, I'll do what I always do. I'll do my little hack. So, okay. There's Dana. All right, y'all. We're about to go in. Give me another second. All right.
They don't want you to know the truth.
Hey, peace, everybody. Let's see what hellscape happened from this administration today. Hey, Dana, you good? You can hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Okay, so today he announced he is going to fire or Musk, Musk is the real president. I don't know who Donald Trump is, but they're going to fire 80,000 people that work in Veterans Affairs. So the people that fought for this country and those living rurally that don't have a way, and now you're cutting 80,000 jobs. Like, I'm not a military person. I'm anti-imperialist, absolutely. But what the hell, y'all? Like 80,000? Now that's bringing up to about 375,000 people that the federal government has fired from federal departments. And then today, they are going to close Social Security offices around the country. The ones that stay open, they are now telling anybody in this country that has Social Security as not an entitlement because you pay into it, and people with disabilities will have to come into these offices and prove that they are who they say they are. Okay? While they're closing field offices, right? How do elderly people get there? How do disabled people get there? You could do this all online. You know, when you're doing anything with the federal government now, they have an ID me. You put your passport in, they do facial recognition, and then you have your passcode and everything. So they're closing offices. What happens again to elderly folks, disabled folks, right? That depend on this to live. But I think what they're banking on is that people won't show up and they're going to do more cuts. And they're going to say, well, we have the offices open. And you're like, somebody lives on a farm 83 miles away from how are they supposed to get there? And I think that's their way of completely dismantling Social Security. And it seems that this will probably break and you're going to see uproar everywhere. So I didn't even introduce myself. Hi, everybody. This is Rosa Clemente with Disrupt the Chaos, sponsored by Cooperation Jackson. But what has been good, and I saw a town hall meeting. I live in Albany, Schenectady is like 25 miles away. Our congressperson, his name is Paul Tonko. They went in. I've never seen a town hall ever that packed in Albany or Schenectady. I mean, people were standing outside. And two things: stop this genocide. Another 500 people plus have been killed in a day and a half by the IDF. And now they're saying they're going full into the West Bank. And then over 700 injured in less than 2 days. We know the majority of these people now are women and children because they killed a lot of the men, right? And they're saying they accidentally, a little while ago, they bombed another hospital, the only one accidentally, right? So, but it was good to see people like that. It was good to see like white folks, black folks. That, I mean, there were, as I've been saying, I don't like snark. And even though I abhor anything the Republican Party does forever, I'm not a Democrat either. Y'all know I'm rolling with the Green Party, but yo, have some humanity. Like, I don't like seeing this kind of progressive media like, y'all got what you got. I'm like, yo, no matter what, these are human beings. Can we just like agree that people should be able to eat, have clean water, have the benefits that they have? We can talk about those people for sure, 77 million. But I don't like it. And I'm not going to be part of the whole snarky, liberal, progressive kind of people that every day, that's what you voted for. This is why this happened. I'm like, well, what are y'all doing? Like, the Democratic Party is trash. So what are you doing as a Democrat? And also I think it's now time prime 100%. We got to build the Green Party and find out our candidates who are going to run. There's no better time in electoral politics since I've been in it in my early 20s that there is a possibility that we can make the Green Party not a third party anymore. Now, that requires a lot, years, and all of that, but let's just have some humanity. Like, no matter what, don't let them take away who we are as human beings, period. So happy to have my next guest, Dana Kaplan, is currently the Director of Justice Reform at the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, where she is leading NICRJ's federal projects to assist jurisdictions across the country in developing community-based continuum of care for young people, and expand alternatives to youth incarceration through closing youth correctional facilities and reinvesting cost savings into community programs. Dana is also senior advisor to the Independent Rikers Commission, supporting New York City's groundbreaking effort to close the jails on Rikers Island, replace them with a smaller system of borough facilities with less than a third of their detention capacity, and transform Rikers Island itself into a green infrastructure hub. She spent 8 years at the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, where she oversaw 150 million in contracted programming to reduce the city's jail population, and played a key leadership role in the development of the city's plan to close Rikers. She also went and relocated to New Orleans, I think probably like 7 years right after the hurricane. There were like some people that were like, no, I'm going to go there. So Dana and Kali Okuna from Paul Whitebridge actually moved. And Dana was the executive director of the JJPL, the Juvenile Justice Project. And she also ran for office while she was there. But she's been back in New York, I guess, oh God, maybe a decade already. Yeah, probably a little bit more than that. And also she's like my girl, like Swati, my best friend. She is one of my best friends and people ever. Dana, girl, I've talked to you, but not interviewed you. The moment right now, how do you see it? And especially because you have now children in your lives, 2 young Black sons that unfortunately will have to navigate, how do you see the moment right now that we're in?
Ooh, Rosa. Man, you laid it out in the beginning. I'm not gonna sugarcoat the moment that we're in right now on a national or a global level, right? Like, we're all seeing the same thing, waking up to, new crazy news, and just, complete violations of human rights, just a disregard of the law, just no checks and balances. And obviously, billionaire technocrats kind of calling all the shots. So it is like a bleak moment, on a global level, and starting here in the US, and what that means, and how the United States is presenting on a global stage. Now, that being said, I'm also like forever an optimist. I actually I think in November, right after we knew what was happening in the election, I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. with about like 1,000 people from around the country. Actually, like a conference sponsored by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the DOJ. And Brian Stevenson was the keynote speaker. And he gave just an incredible, speech where he said like the opposite, basically, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something about like, the only thing that we like, the importance of hope, really.
Yeah.
And just, how if we have hope, that is how like we sustain like and that is how we get justice. And it was like a call to, I think, a lot of people in the room who felt like very beleaguered, and just, it's like, and maybe hopeless about what comes next. People who didn't necessarily have, a lack of critique about what the Democratic Party policies have been, particularly in my world, criminal justice, right? But, saw what was being articulated by the Trump administration and we're like, where do we go from here? I'm like, we'll wake up every day focused on the hope. And I think right now, the things that give me hope amidst all of this is like absolutely the possibility of what it means when, people are continuing to get like re-energized and young people and students are organizing and, you see the energy coming back, not just to say what it was look like for the midterms or the next election, but like, how do I fight right here, right now?
Yeah.
But also a lot of hope about like what we can do in at the local level, right? That I don't want to dismiss the importance of what happens at the federal level because it is huge and it's hitting people's lives, and there are people like behind bars right now as a result of this, new administration. At the same time, and I'm in New York City, so this is the town that I'm paying attention to. I'm hopeful that we're going to see Rikers close. I don't, feel any less hopeful about that now than I did, a year ago. I know it's going to be hard, but I also feel like we have, people organizing for that and working for that every single day and keeping that moving forward. I'm working with places around the country, at state and local, that are really, really, really trying to transform their systems. I'm working with folks in Maryland, that are doing incredible work trying to start programs around gun violence intervention. I've been working with folks in Hawaii where they've reduced the number of youth who are incarcerated in the state by over 80%. They've got literally like 20 kids incarcerated in the entire state of Hawaii, which is amazing. So,
Yeah.
I think that that's what I'm focused on is like, it is rough. And you read the news and you're like, wow, or you hear what's happening. You wake up and you say, what, the ceasefire is over? I mean, every day it's new stuff. But I also think it is just so important to kind of think, okay, but like, what can I keep on waking up and doing? And I'm going to keep on like, fighting for change at that level and show up, but also like, what can I change in my community right now? Like, what is the thing that will make a difference in a sphere that I also can impact and control? And that I see a lot of different opportunities to make progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think like all of us in our generation, the decades of work we've all put in are very clear that it has to come on the local level. For many reasons, a national movement like when we were coming up does not exist for a lot of reasons. A lot of distrust, but also a lot of attack, and I'm looking at more thinking about Ferguson and Black Lives Matter and all the organizations, the new ones that, came to be Dream Defenders, Mi Gente, and though I have critiques, I do know that people who are organizers are going to organize and be active in any way that is necessary at this moment, you know. And I'm actually super glad that we haven't seen let's go to DC in March. I'm like, yo, we passed that. We don't need to go to DC. Go outside your house and see what's going on the corner with young people or whatever work you do. So well, let me back up a little. Can you tell folks how you got involved with criminal justice work? You grew up in New York City, went to Hunter High School, right? Not Hunter, Hunter High School, went to Berkeley. But I remember asking you this before, and I saw your TED Talk, which everybody look it up. Like these TED Talks, I'm beginning to watch them now, and I'm like, oh, that was a decade ago, and exactly what we thought was going to happen is here. But what was the moment you're like, okay, I'm going to have to do, this is going to be what I'm doing? Because as my girl, I've seen you 100% like always focused. Like, this is what I love. This is what I'm going to do. So how did you come to that, you know, and be like, this is the work I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah. It's so fun. I feel like so many people get involved when they're like young, kind of like student age. And I'm just laughing because I think your last guest, like, you know, told the same story about when he was in college. So yeah, I was an undergraduate at Berkeley. I'm like a born and raised New York City kid, but I was like, let me try out the West Coast for a quick minute. And so I went out to California. It was like right when affirmative action had been outlawed. So my class, like my year, was like the last year where you could use affirmative action in admissions. And there was just like a really vibrant organizing scene on racial justice issues that I kind of like walked into. And so it, was something that I just like immediately became involved in. And at a certain point, it was like kind of the early days of people, kind of identifying, wow, we're in this era of mass incarceration.
Right.
Critical resistance, the first critical resistance conference was on the Berkeley campus. And I feel like I walked in and like happened to hear Angela Davis speaking. And people were talking about like what is happening with this incredible explosion of prisons in the United States. And I ended up taking an internship at the San Francisco County Jail. Just like as a volunteer running classes and, just a lot of different things, like, including that, like there was a class where our program for, young fathers, I think it wasn't just for fathers, it was primarily fathers, could visit, like if they had children below a certain age, they could visit, like have like a personal visit with them as long as they had a like kind of volunteer chaperone. So I was like doing that with these parents who are getting like this like rare like opportunity to see their kids. And all of that just had like an incredibly profound, impact on me. And I'll just like, be real, as like a white woman from New York City who like at that point was like probably 20 something years old. I was like, the reality that I have come from, and then the reality that, other people have come from who are my exact age and peer group,
Right.
but who ended up in like very, very, very different circumstances, just crystallized for me, the racial inequities and injustices of mass incarceration in the United States. And so I think I was like, this is the civil rights issue of our time. And I started working on it. I, ended up getting a fellowship to, went back and worked at this place, Prison Moratorium Project, which came up, which was doing a lot of, really great organizing on juvenile justice and, working to stop new prisons from being constructed in New York State, and, did a lot of work on that. I'll say, there was never a moment where I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It is just that this has been the work that has continued to call me. And a lot of times I feel like young people right now, now there's like a lot more focus on this recognition of mass incarceration. It's in the news. It's like there's more funding available to work. I mean, it's like by the way, as it should be,
Right.
as it should be something that is on the front page. And people will come and they'll ask, they're like, well, how do I, have a career in this? And, I'm like, I think the question is like, what's the biggest impact that you can have right now? And, that's kind of the question to ask at any given moment. And then, career kind of follows from there. It's about like, where can you make a difference? And there's lots and lots of ways to impact this beast of a system.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, going to critical resistance was also my like, oh, okay, like understanding numbers, getting my mind around. And I mean, at that time, late 90s, all the way to 2000, probably 10, 12, and 13. I mean, we not only were all organizing together, mostly around mass incarceration and an end to police brutality and all the cases of brothers and sisters have been killed by the police. We were going to that. And we didn't have social media. So we had to learn how to trust each other. We had to learn that we are also trusting in our people who are going to do that work and the other work. It was an exciting time because while Prison Moratorium Project, y'all are doing that work at that high level and engaging like policy and lawyers as well as the communities. I was on the ground with Malcolm X grassroots when we're doing Cop Watch, or like we're always together. And I think part of maybe what's happening now is because of social media. We don't have like where people just build with each other, like we're going to all connect, but we were building solidarity, but really going hard against policing, mass incarceration, and, obviously the Rockefeller drug laws that we were all part of. Drop the rock. And, movement wins don't happen like in 3 months. It's decades of doing the work that finally gets the wins, but of course seeing the explosion of mass incarceration. So here you are, you were in de Blasio's for the full 8 years, and Rikers. I was like, girl, that's I was like, woo, Rikers. And I think unfortunately most everybody knows about Rikers, if anything, of Khalif Broader that was killed basically. And that really brought like a newer generation. But you're working in the mayor's office. Your whole 8 years was about, we got to shut this down. And so today, there was an article that came out that you referenced on LinkedIn that says to finally close Rikers, panel suggests making it someone's only job. And everybody should check out the article at the New York Times. So how was that? I mean, lay that out for us.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I have to, give credit where credit is due on this. So all right, let me just back up for a second. A lot of people, I think everyone knows about Rikers Island. So whether you're in New York City or you're not in New York City, right? It's quite infamous.
Yeah.
It opened like in like 1930. It's, people have been talking about closing it since the 70s. Like really, like from the moment it's open, people have been talking about, the problems that were there.
And let me just say this real quick, Dana, for folks, they'll say Rikers thinking it's one prison. We're talking Rikers Island, where there's 7 different facilities from juvenile to women to men, and then the high. So it's a city of, I get, an island of jails. It's not, Rikers Island is not just one, it's 7 or 8, right?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be 11. Now it's gone down to 8. There's like, different jails that have been closed. There had been 16 and 17-year-olds. I'll say that one of the projects that I worked on when I was at the mayor's office was moving all the 16 and 17-year-olds off of Rikers Island, which was a huge win. Obviously lots that could be said about, some of the challenges that were part of that process, but, it's like a huge just victory really that there's no longer juveniles there. That was a result of legislation that was passed to raise the age in New York, and a lot of different advocacy organizations that have pushed for that. Now, Rikers Island is a massive penal colony, right? And in the 90s in New York City, there was 22,000 people in jail. Now, by the time I started at the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice in 2014, it was about half of that. And that there's a long history too about how, the work that happened even to reduce that number of people in jail from 22,000 down to 11,000 in 2014. The campaign to close Rikers was an organizing push that was led by formerly incarcerated individuals, justice impacted individuals. An organization called Just Leadership was at the helm of it and forefront. But there was dozens, if not more than 100 different organizations that came together and were really, really calling on the city and calling on Mayor de Blasio to close Rikers Island. And, say how can we in New York City, in this city that is at that point championing a vision of a transformed criminal justice system and talking about, racial equality and, justice and all these things, how can we have this stain and the stories that keep on coming out of it? Like you mentioned, Khalif Browder, that was a story that rightfully made it to the, kind of to the forefront. But, it's not an isolated story, unfortunately. So you had this huge organizing push. You also had an independent commission that was appointed by then Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, who was the city council speaker, appointed this commission, and they were studying the issue, came out with a big report saying that Rikers should close. Again, in the midst of this big organizing campaign that was had 1,000 people marching across the bridge to Rikers, was bird dogging the mayor at, fundraising events he was doing in Florida. And eventually, the mayor really, made this declaration that, New York City would commit to closing Rikers Island. And I'll say, even, amidst the organizing push, there were a lot of people within City Hall and within the administration that also thought Rikers should close. So it was also a conversation that was happening internally. But what was lacking was the ability to see that as possible, right? So people thought, from a public policy perspective, Rikers should close. But there was it'll never happen, right? Now, that organizing push meant that it actually felt real. So in 2017, there was a commitment made to close Rikers. Now, I'll be real. In some ways, the easy thing is agreeing to close Rikers. The hard part is how do you actually do it? And that's where we find ourselves right now. And I know I could go on and on and on and on. So I won't, I'll let you ask questions or whatever, but I'll just say the hard part is where we are right now. It is a plan that is already behind schedule. It's over budget. There's, a lot of, I will be real, there's a lot of people who are frustrated that the plan involves any type of, replacement facilities at all, and that's a legitimate perspective of an abolitionist critique of the plan.
Yeah.
I'll say that, the plan also calls for 50, at this point, thousands fewer jail beds than what currently exists in the city, because it is a plan to close Rikers Island, but it is also a plan that is predicated on reducing the jail population by thousands more people through reentry, through case processing reforms, through more diversion, through alternatives to incarceration, by saying we have to close this facility, but also we need thousands fewer people in it through more mental health beds and mental health supports, right? Because it's the largest psychiatric facility on the East Coast. So Rikers Island.
The largest.
Yeah, in terms, yeah.
Wow.
So, there's, again, we're in the thick of trying to actually implement that plan. and also acknowledging it's not just a bricks and mortars thing, right? Like, it is one thing to shut a facility and replace it. We need a complete reckoning with what prisons and jails and conditions look like in the United States. And on the one hand, we have to have an understanding of what have been the failures of reform historically. But on the other hand, people are still incarcerated in the United States, right? People are still jailed in New York City. And so we have to actually also care about what the conditions are for those individuals.
Right.
And that is, I think, really like where we are right now. And the Independent Rikers Commission, which now I've been, helping to be a part of or support, released a second plan today, kind of an updated blueprint of how we can actually see Rikers close once and for all. We've got a new mayoral election underway. We're going to have, potentially new leadership in City Hall. And I am hopeful that this will be the time period in which we will actually finally see Rikers close. And amidst everything else that is going on at the national level, at the global level, I am so excited for New York City to demonstrate that it is possible to actually have safety, have justice, and also turn the corner on what has been such a failed justice system that has harmed so many people to date.
Yeah, and through your whole tenure, you were also going to community meetings. And I remember, when we were sharing, and you're like, I don't want a smaller prison or a detention center in the boroughs, but we also have to be realistic in the sense of that would reduce harm. So I think that in itself, that tightrope, but I think also I do believe, and I saw some of that community people knew who you were, and it was like, I don't want to be up here doing this. Like, I want it all gone. But how does that happen? Like you said, especially with people with mental health issues, what happens? You're just going to let somebody go? We don't want anybody in those facilities, but I now more understand when people say, while we work on this, let's also reduce the harm. I'm glad to see that it's the work is still happening. I don't know about the current administration and Eric. I don't know. All I know is it don't look good, and hopefully some other people will run that finally will be like, yo, we can end this, and we already have the plan. Y'all have the plan. It's now fully implementing it, and as you said, making it happen. So, and fam, remember too that a lot of people die in Rikers every year, and it's more and more. And people say, oh, it's only 10 people this year. That doesn't matter. Like, you go into a facility, the SEALs are not supposed to kill you. Like, they're not supposed to use your body for their benefit in any of these ways. And thinking about Robert Brooks and that case in Rochester, the trial's going to start. And it's the first time ever that SEALs in New York City have ever been indicted on murder. And I have to say, when the DA came up, I was like, oh yeah, they're going to dismiss the charges. He's like, no, we're indicting them for murder. I was like, but then unfortunately, while that's happening, another young brother, Messiah Notwe, very, very young, was also beaten to death. With the Robert Brooks, we see the video, as our guest last week told us, Dr. Burton, that they didn't have their cameras on, but the server will automatically turn the camera on. And I was like, oh, that's how that happened. Because when you see, you're like, are they stupid to do this? And they thought they were going to get away with that. And the server kicked in. With his younger brother, Messiah, he was in a pod, and a lot of the other people, when they sent in the investigators, said they didn't see him, but they heard the entire beating, and they knew he was going to die while they were locked up in the cells. So I think there's also going to be, unfortunately, a blowback in the prison system, particularly in upstate New York, and these SEALs that just got mostly what they wanted, are pretty much probably thinking like they're going to keep getting away with things like that. But so you traveling to Hawaii, and you're saying there's 22 young people in the entire Hawaii and the other islands, 22 young people in a juvenile.
In their youth prison there. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. And
What did they do then? Since you've been going back and forth, well, how did that happen?
well, all right. Let me. I definitely want to talk about Hawaii, but the one thing I want to just say on, the question about the cameras is, I think, there's that like phrase, right? Like sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Mhm.
There has been one of the things that has been allowed the horrific, horrific conditions and abuses of power that happen in U.S. prisons and jails to proliferate has been because there's been so little transparency, so little access. Media is like denied. A lot of places have been reluctant to have outside organizations, programs, oversight. So, just in the spirit of while these institutions are here, like what is necessary to be able to ensure that there can be attention paid to what is happening inside is those things like cameras make a difference, right? Like oversight organizations in New York State, one of the things that has been one of the responses to everything that that has happened and come to light has been a real move to strengthen New York City or New York State's prison monitoring organization, the Correctional Association, just to say like, okay, how do we have more people monitoring what's happening? And one of the things that makes me optimistic about Rikers and everything, even that's happening at the state level, is more people are paying attention. You have more state legislators and elected officials who care about these things, right? The media, like stories are coming out. And that doesn't mean that there's not a huge, huge, huge way to go. But I think that there is just a whole new level of public awareness and support. And like across the board, people's consciences are shocked when they see things like that. And, and my final point on that, and then I'll just move on, is that there's this notion, like too often when we have this conversation, there's this notion like, well, okay, but crime victims don't support these types of reforms or things like that. And actually, what we know is that the people and the communities that are overwhelmingly the experience violent crime or gun violence are also the same communities that are overrepresented in our country's prisons and jails. So we did a survey of crime victims in New York City to ask them their feelings on public safety. And overwhelmingly, they were like, we want alternatives to incarceration. We think they're more effective. We want to see people in mental health treatment programs, not in jail. We think longer sentences are not actually going to be effective. All of the things that people are working for in reform are the things that crime victims actually want. They want to see, they feel people don't feel safe. And that is a huge problem. And they want to see change. But what people are calling for is not the same thing that, the media will necessarily have you believe. Or, what certain elected officials will, in a very, very, very craven way, put forward as the solutions for, public safety. So that's what I'll say on that. On Hawaii.
So with that part, I've read a lot of families who are the victims of murder, the families. Oftentimes in states with the death penalty, they'll say, we don't believe in the death penalty. So that goes into the whole, always like, even those that are most impacted, there's still going to be a DA or a policy person that's like, that's cool, but we're going to still do this execution in the name of your family. And I've always seen families do that. And the last, I would say, like, maybe like 7 or 8 years, we've seen 2 organizations really grow, the Alliance for Families and Alliance for Family and what's the name? Sophia Elijah, the executive director.
Yeah, Alliance for yeah, Alliance for
Which in fact, Sophia's going to be on next week or the other week.
Right.
And then RAP, that's the releasing aging prisoners. And they especially RAP is here a lot during the legislative season. And like to see that this state apparatus of jails will have 80-year-olds in there. Come on, like let them go. That means somebody's been in there 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, like, what's the purpose of keeping and it's a significant amount because these are what people might call lifers, right? And then their lawyers, whatever they're no longer quote a threat to the community. So it's always, I think, part of it, especially here in upstate, it's all about the money. If they close another prison down, 3 hours going to the Canadian border, the entire town loses, period, because so many of the jobs and factories and all that went away in the 80s, and prisons keep these little small communities alive, as opposed to saying, no, this is what we can do, and we can have come out of a place where your paycheck is dependent on how many people get put in that prison in your town. So yeah, so the Hawaii, because I know how much you've been going back and forth and seeing your writing, just his 22, like, whoa.
Yeah, well, and this is, put it in the category of things that give me hope right now, right?
Yeah.
So, the Hawaii juvenile justice system. So another thing that's hopeful, right? And actually the New York Times just did a whole piece on this, is that we've actually on a national level seen the number of young people who are incarcerated go down by over 70%, right, in the last few years. There's
Wow.
not actually a lot of people paying attention to that.
Yeah,
But
that's
there
huge.
have been, there's been a huge reduction in the number of incarcerated youth, with youth correctional facilities closing as a result of that. I think in New York State, there was over 20 youth correctional facilities that were closed,
Yeah.
right? Like, and because there has actually been a real mentality shift, not just in the public, but actually with people who work in the juvenile justice system, right? To say, okay, we need to be understanding that this deep end of incarceration is actually not serving us well, right? Now you're seeing some, there's a backlash to that right now for sure. But the numbers in terms of where we are do not lie in that there's been, again, this huge reduction. Hawaii has reduced the number of young people who are incarcerated in its correctional facilities by even more than that, by like over 80%. So that right now, again, there's like about 20 young people there's one juvenile prison. There's about 20 young people. And the last time I was there, which was just a couple weeks ago, there was 7 youth in the state's juvenile jail. And, there's a lot of things that have been factors in that. But one of the things that is like really inspiring about what they're doing is that there's this incredible infrastructure of community-based organizations, specifically who are led by Indigenous Native Hawaiians, who are using and incorporating Native Hawaiian practices as part of, paths to kind of healing and community safety. And they have on the facility where the Hawaii's one youth prison is, it's called the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility. There had been multiple facilities there. They've shut, one of them has already been completely emptied out and shut down and converted. It had been operating as a little bit of, it had been housing. I think they're trying to open some, mental health beds, like mental health housing beds for young adults there, like give it over to a community nonprofit provider. But they've got all these other organizations on the campus, and they've renamed the whole campus. A new name, Kawiloa, committed to like healing, where there's school, a farm, a homeless shelter. Again, I said there's going to be these young adult beds, and it's really like their orientation is how do we continue to reduce and reduce and reduce the number of incarcerated young people in our system, but how do we do this by building up this infrastructure of community-based organizations, and not just on Oahu, which is the main or the island that has the majority of the population, but on Maui, on the Big Island, on Kauai, and make sure that the Native Hawaiian community, and then now there's like an increasing Micronesian population, are really equipped to be able to serve and work with young people, because the leadership there thinks that they can go even further down below 20 something, right? Like they are not resting on their laurels in terms of the progress that's been made. There's a real commitment for further transformation, and they, I think they're a model for the rest of the country.
I mean that, and using indigenous native practices, because obviously if a young person is caught up, there's some adult or somebody abandoned them, or they have faced issues, and might not have been like spiritually connected to even their own history. So that's like the model right there. Like young people aren't young and then at 12 are like, yeah, I think I'll go do something, get in prison. There's something that happens in that young people's life, and it's usually an abandonment of them in many ways, from schools, the community, their own family. So I mean, that is huge. Now, I think last month I got to send you the article. I'm reading the story about the Albany County Jail that's run by the sheriffs, and the numbers are so low now. There, they transformed part of it into a drop-in houseless section, right? So it's like they took the picture and where the houseless people can come, the cell still exists, but they've been painted as completely open. And at first I was like, huh? And then I was like, yeah. I mean, if we're doing the work, eventually these buildings can be transformed into something for the community, because they're going to be there, these buildings. They don't need to go decrepit. They can. And I was like, okay, at least that's thinking outside of this is what keep us safe. So, because especially during after Ferguson, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and a phrase that a lot of organizers are using now is "we keep us safe." What does that mean? What does that look like for you when you're doing the work? And again, try to get to people like, we don't need to be hiring thousands. Oh, and in fact, cops, your boy, he ain't my boy. Cuomo is talking about the first thing he's going to do is hire 5,000 police officers after 15 years of organizations doing the hard work and staying vigilant, especially against those that have been killed by the police. Like, why would that be your first thing? Because you're playing up the fact that everybody in the country is saying crime is so out of control in New York City, which is not even the case. The numbers are still going down. But yeah, that idea of we keep us safe, what does that mean? And how should people be thinking about what that means for them and the work that they do?
I think that there's just a lot of really exciting examples right now, or models of what real community safety solutions can look like. And a lot of them start with, how do you capacitate existing community organizations, community leaders, folks on the ground to be the ones that are the front lines of, criminal justice. And I say criminal justice, but what I'm talking about, like violence interrupters, right? There's just been an incredible development of, some like offices of neighborhood safety. The organization that I work with, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, hosts something called the Offices of Violence Prevention Network. There's over 70 different offices from around the country of people who are, supporting violence interrupters to be out there in the neighborhoods, in the communities, de-escalating violence, intervening when there's a shooting, making sure there's no retaliation, identifying the people who are the most at risk of becoming involved in gun violence, and connecting them to services, like sending out people who they can relate to to interrupt violence, working in the hospitals to make that impact. I think that is just where you really actually see neighborhood solutions and local solutions to gun violence, as an example. But there's also, in terms of justice transformation, a lot of the work to reduce the number of incarcerated young people has been saying, how do we find the local organizations and train them and develop them,
Right.
and make sure that they are able to work with young people who might have a lot of risks and needs. I think, sometimes the misnomer is, oh, just give a kid a mentor and they're good, right? Like, this might be a young person who's gone through a lot of trauma, and might need someone who can work with them in a more intensive way than just like, I'll call you every 3 weeks and take you out for dinner, right?
Right.
And so that frontline work, we have to treat the frontline people working in community organizations with that same level of value that we have historically given traditional law enforcement officers, right? So if
Mm.
we think there's an appropriate conversation about, okay, for police officers, for correctional officers, et cetera, like, they have hard jobs, and how do we understand like retention, recruitment, like fair pay and training, which is so important. We have to treat just as seriously the ecosystem and infrastructure of community organizations and community leaders who do violence interruption work, who respond to mental health emergencies, right? Like programs like Be Heard in New York City, which sends out social workers and, health, has a health response when there's a
Oh,
mental
yeah.
health crisis.
And Life Camp, Erica Ford, y'all, she been doing, 20 years on what Life Camp,
Absolutely.
where this one specific sister, she's mentored a lot of us. Erica Ford, look it up, Life Camp, because for almost 14 months in the area they were in, there was not one shooting in like 14 months.
Absolutely. Like, research has been done to demonstrate that these programs work, right?
Yeah.
And Erica has been doing, right? Like, I mean, kudos to her, because I think she just was able to retire after, or
Yeah,
I'm
she
sure she's not retired. I'm sure
Yeah.
she's still working hard, but just able to step away from that daily leadership. But her and all the organizations doing in this work in New York City and in other places, right? Like, they are on call 24/7.
Mhm.
And they're probably, paid pennies to the dollar in terms of, just the compensation. Like, it is, but when I say, or when people say we keep us safe, like, that's the infrastructure that is what actually will transform neighborhoods and like does have an impact in public safety. And that's what that's the ecosystem that we have to build up across this country right now.
And so as we wind up, I haven't heard from this administration really in a good way, like, don't talk about mass incarceration, like, leave the people alone. You're going after some other entities. But do you think with this administration on the federal level that things that are working will be impacted, specifically nonprofits and foundations that will lose their money? We already see nonprofits getting cut, or there's going to be a time where they're going to go after all the nonprofits, and I don't know who's going to be first, but we do know, and I think everybody's aware that a lot of people are losing their funding. Like, we're talking $50 million, $100 million. Do you think that level of, let's say, attack is going to come to prison reform, abolishment of prisons? You think the Department of Justice is going to ever step in, or they're just going to kind of do their thing while organizations around the country are going to be relatively okay? Or do we have to stay very vigilant?
I'm I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Department of Justice. Right, there's a lot of unknowns. I don't think Doge has gotten to them yet, but but it's coming.
Yeah.
Uh, so and I think unfortunately, I would not be surprised if now if you want to make cuts in efficiency, right, like in fiscal efficiency, I think the natural starting point would be the incredible cost of mass incarceration. Unfortunately, if only, one would hope that if
Yeah.
folks are concerned about, fiscal efficiency and reducing public bloat, that's where they'd start. I'm not sure that that's what will happen, but that's what, that's where they should start. They should not start with the community programs like I just, talked
Yeah.
about that, are so much less costly and so much more effective. So, I don't know what will happen. I think everyone is paying close attention, obviously. But that being said, returning to the question of hope, I have been surprised over the years to find that some of the biggest allies that I've had in this work have been folks that I might have not considered, naturally on the same page with me politically on a number of other issues. So, I worked in Louisiana for many, many years. And I will say that I want to give some kudos to some Catholic Republican legislators who, because of their commitment, and a belief of life in its like kind of purest form, were the ones who are willing to champion hard bills on, ending life without parole for juveniles is just one
Right.
example. Or people who really were concerned about the fiscal impacts on the state of, all these prisons and jails. And so I will never think that there's not a real possibility that, we can, with a whole cross section of people who come at this with from many different, kind of political orientations, not be able to make progress, especially on the local level, especially, in the state level, in trying to say, okay, this is like a common sense approach to community safety.
Right.
And we should just keep on putting that forward, talking about the human cost, talking about what we know works, and still like just keep on making change to push forward.
Yeah, I mean, and I think young people who engage because they've been impacted or affected, but engage in this type of work, like once they're in it, they're going to be in it for life. And I think this moment particularly is also there's going to be a lot of people that you would never put together with someone. Like the thing in politics always is there's no permanent enemies or friends, just permanent interests. And I think whatever the growing reaction is going to be against this entire administration, there are going to be people who probably say the same thing. I never thought I'd be sitting next to you, right? Or I didn't think that. And I think, with more of the language of intersectionality, with more understanding the impact everything that this administration is doing is going to do to working people, inflation, all of that, so I hope that they just leave this part alone, like go do something. We don't want to see any more children incarcerated, or people in general are going, to prison for life, so, I'll bring you back. I really want to thank you because just the Hawaii thing, I was like, right. Like every day we can say, okay, there's something working. I mean, ultimately, fam, we're organizers and activists. We're always going to be hopeful. There might be some days where you're like, I don't know what's going to happen, but you're going to get up tomorrow. So I'm so glad. Oh, Dana. So, oh, you're not on social media, girl. If you don't want to find her on LinkedIn. I was like, Instagram. Now she's like, nah, but she's on LinkedIn.
I'm on Instagram.
Well, Dana Kaplan, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to bring you back. And, I have to say, being your friend for a long time, like once you do something, you go all the way to the mat. And always, I think, inspires a lot of people to like, it doesn't end here. It's consistent. It has to be your life's work, you know? So I'm glad you're out there doing that work for all of us.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, you my girl, like you said. So I always welcome a conversation. And you know, thank you for doing the show and continuing to uplift all of these issues.
Thank you. Give the fam my love, and I love you. I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. DM me. Oh, we had a lot of people on tonight. Yeah, Dana, after this, go on Instagram and see the live. There's a lot of folks on here. Hey, everybody. Okay. Oh, perfect timing. It's about to shut off in 30 seconds. So thank you for tuning in. I'll see y'all next week. I might get on Instagram live, depending on what happens this weekend. All right. Peace, fam. Peace, everybody. Thank you for joining me again for Disrupted Chaos. Dana Kaplan, you can find her on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I'll see you next Wednesday. You know, everybody stay vigilant, stay hopeful. We'll see you soon. And lastly, Disrupted Chaos is sponsored by Cooperation Jackson. So make sure you go to our Instagram page and join part of the Build and Fight formula that is coming out of Cooperation Jackson. So peace, everybody. See y'all soon.